On March 21 this year, some miscreant military adventurers in Mali made a coup d'etat against the popularly elected democratic government of that country. As if that was not bad enough, on April 12 came the news that another coup d'etat had taken place in Guinea-Bissau, another West African country. The timing of those two coups could not have been worse for my ongoing project, of which today's lecture is a part, which is to persuade people that, regardless of its foreign provenance, there is nothing in the African soil, air, and water that makes the continent an inhospitable location for liberal democracy and the rule of law. My reaction then was, I wonder when Africans will stop thinking of the joint. However, contrary to what used to be the practice when the military ruled the roost and one-party regimes held sway in the continent, the coupists this time around could not have been more mistaken. 2 days later in Mali, their coup was reversed. Although there has not been any definitive resolution to the situation in Mali, quite the contrary, things have gotten worse with the invasion of the country by Islamist radicals. The military has been forced to yield formal control to the civil authorities, and the same is true of Guinea-Bissau. But what has happened suffices for me to come here in more optimistic circumstances, reinforced by the corroboration of my certitude, a strong word for a philosophy teacher, that the era of military adventurism and rascality and of the coups that are usually their preferred vehicles is over in Africa. Thanks to the activities of the Economic Community of West African States, otherwise known as ECOWAS, their coup has been stymied. I am mad that the coupists in Mali, for instance, were allowed to negotiate an amnesty for making the coup in the first place. I think all of them should go to jail. Unfortunately, this is not the way that the issue is presented in these parts. In fact, the day the Mali coup happened, an African studies expert from the University of London, I think, was on BBC World Service News pontificating on how popular the Mali coup was, how fed up people were with the government of Amadou Toumani Touré, and how there were serious allegations of corruption tied to drug trafficking by elements of the Malian administration and so on. For that so-called expert, Africa was just being Africa. And there's no need for the rest of humanity to be overly concerned. That is Africa. That used to be the attitude. 1. Presidential elections were held in Ghana in December 2008. The two leading candidates in the first round had a runoff that was won by the man who, until July this year, was president of Ghana, John Atta Mills. He died in July this year, unfortunately. That by itself is no cause for comment. But he won by a slight fraction of 1% of all votes cast. The losing candidate at first sounded as if he was going to ask for a recount or even go to court to contest the outcome. Ultimately, he chose to accept the results. That is, no recount, no challenge, no acrimony. According to him, he and his party have 4 years to undo the results, and as I speak, he's gearing up for this year's version against the current incumbent. Contrast that outcome and the losing candidate's equanimity with the solid record of Florida in 2000, or this year's Republican primaries in a handful of states, including Iowa. How much coverage did Ghana's successful elections attract in the American press? 2. Presidential and parliamentary elections were held in Kenya in December 2007, and it led to mayhem in its aftermath. Some of the leaders who have been identified as sponsoring the mayhem have recently had indictments returned against them by the International Criminal Court at The Hague. When it happened, the news was all over the place here. 3. Zambia held presidential and parliamentary elections in December 2011. The incumbent president lost, and the ruling party he headed lost control of parliament. The incumbent president promptly relinquished power and said, quote, "We just did not reach the voters this time around," end of quote. Another point about the Zambian election, the vice president on the winning ticket is a white Zambian. The last time I checked, no doubts have ever been raised about his Zambian citizenship. This is not to say that Zambia has not had its share of the latest refuge for scoundrels, authorism. A former president of the country did question the citizenship of the founding president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda. This only goes to show you that hatred is an equal opportunity employer. And number 4, late last year, the Senegalese went to the polls. The incumbent president, Abdoulaye Wade, had decided to grandfather himself into an exception from constitutionally mandated term limits, and he secured a dubious cover from the Constitutional Court. But he was massively opposed by the Senegalese electorate. Against a united opposition and a determined electorate, he limped into the runoff elections, which eventually terminated his political career. As usual, the experts on Africa at this end were sure that Senegal would descend into chaos, since it was held the incumbent would not quit, even if he lost the runoffs. But he did leave, as Senegalese democracy, one of the oldest and most continuous in the continent, delivered on its promise. Nothing extraordinary there for those of us who know the history of the country. The dominant orientation is that Africa and liberal democracy don't mix. The founding myth of this orientation is traceable to the metaphysics of difference, inaugurated by the social Darwinists and their fellow travelers in colonial anthropology in the 19th century. The end result is that we often assume, mistakenly and convinced, that the solutions that have availed for the rest of the world will not translate well in Africa. It is almost as if African phenomena are irremediably sui generis. Simultaneously, we routinely dismiss the possibility of applying to similar problems elsewhere in the world, solutions that have been authored by Africans. In light of the putative radical difference of Africans from the rest of the human race, we seem to think that there can be no African insights into the universal that can be of use to other humans. Africa is not thought with the rest of the world. Yes, the election in Ghana should not have called for comment. But in light of the accepted wisdom regarding Africa's relation to liberal democracy, we should remark it. Contrast the benign neglect in the US press of the Ghana situation and that of Zambia with the overwhelming attention paid to Kenya in the aftermath of its elections in 2008. I guess, as the saying goes, if it bleeds, it leads. I protest because it seems as if the press is to be believed, it never stops bleeding in Africa. The only thing that is certain in the world is this: humans mess up. If you see two people gesturing to each other in a language you don't understand, chances are one is telling the other, you've messed up again. By their current actions across the continent, Africans are reminding us for the umpteenth time, freedom is not a geographical, cultural, or national thing. It is a human attribute. I need not remind us that this call resonates more in philosophy than in any other discipline. The question is, are we listening? Thank you very much for your attention.